Welcome to the Histories of Northamptonshire podcast series, and this episode number 58. Recorded on location, each episode tells the story of one of the many and varied objects which are the focus of the exhibition A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects. The exhibition runs at the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery between the 20th of September 2025 and February 2026. Selected by local individuals, heritage groups and the museum's own curators, each object tells a different story from the county's past. And so, to our guest for this episode.
Okay, my name's John Paul Carr, and the object that I chose was a miniature portrait of a lady by the name of Hannah Sparke. It's no bigger than a postcard size.
So it's a very small piece of work.
Yeah, it is. It sits on a piece of wooden board. If I took the actual picture off, it would sit in the palm of your hand.
It's the person captured within the miniature that has the story, which is really what you're going to talk about.
Exactly. When I was only 11 years old, in 1988, there was the 250th anniversary of the Great Fire of Wellingborough. A lady's name cropped up by the name of Hannah Sparke. Hannah, when this portrait was painted, she was 100 years old. So that portrait was painted in the latter part of the 1700s. In 1738, there was a Great Fire in Wellingborough, which had started on a Saturday afternoon. 200 houses were destroyed and 800 workshops and outbuildings and things like that. It started in Silver Street on a particularly hot day in July. There hadn't been any rain for a while. There'd been no wind until that day. A gentleman, or a young boy I should say, was in a yard at a dye shop roasting some oats. One of the cinders fell off, set light to some hay. The hay set light to the haystack set light to the barn set light to the house. And there was a breeze, and from east to west across the town, it just destroyed right from Silver Street, right through to Cambridge Street, basically destroyed the town of Wellingborough, started in Silver Street and worked itself across the town. Hannah was living at the time, she was a widow, living in a house very near to the parish church in Wellingborough, All Hallows, and she ordered her servants to empty her cellar of beer and wine and any kinds of liquids to tip over the roof of the parish church. As people evacuated their houses, and of course what you'll bear in mind, Wellingborough in those days, it was all thatched cottages, which quickly caught fire. They headed to the church for shelter because it was the biggest building in the town, made of stone, hadn't got a thatched roof. She ordered her servants to tip all the liquids over the top of the church to stop the roof from melting, because of course it was lead, and stop the timbers from catching fire, and she was classed as this heroine. And when she was 100 years of age, she was chaired around the town, and a gentleman by the name of Thomas Hull came to Wellingborough and painted her portrait. He was a miniature portraitor from that period of time. There's works of art down in the various galleries down in London. Hannah carried on living for a number of years. She lived to be 107. When she died in 1785, because she was classed as this heroine of the fire, she was laid to rest in All Hallows Church in Wellingborough, where there's a lovely little tiny monument to her and her memory.
She's actually in the church itself?
Yes, she is, yeah. The portrait itself is quite detailed. You know, you can almost see all the little tiny wrinkles underneath her eyes. She doesn't look a very happy lady in the picture, I hasten to add. But not only was this portrait painted, an Italian artist did some sketches of it and had it printed and sold them, and there's copies in the Royal Collection at Windsor, over at Harvard University, and in various collections around the world. So she's not just famous from Wellingborough's point of view, she's internationally famous as well. What amazes me is that she didn't come from particularly a rich background. She was born in Rothwell, where her father and mother lived, and she was one of several children. She married a gentleman by the name of Havey and eventually settled in Wellingborough, where her husband was a draper in the town. But by the time of the fire in 1738, he'd died, and she was just a widow living in this house with her servants.
Was she a person of standing within the town before this act of heroism, through having the shop that she had, through being a trader, effectively?
Apart from being a trader, I can find very little about her before that period of time. I've found her baptism, I've found her marriage, I've found her death. What's interesting is an historian from Wellingborough in 1838, a gentleman by the name of John Cole, wrote about her life. And when you think about 1838, that's not actually that far from 1785 when she died. And he was able to record exactly what she was like in those memoirs. And likewise about how the fire actually started in Wellingborough and really, as I said, how it destroyed the town.
John Paul, I'm fascinated by the fact that she is immortalised in paint, but in a miniature way. For somebody who has carried out this very selfless act in trying to preserve and protect the church, why was she not painted in a larger way? Why are we talking about a miniature for this object?
I think it was the fashion of the time. And having looked at Thomas Hull and some of the paintings that he did, they don't tend to be... When I say the famous from the period, they tend to be everyday folk. I went down to the Royal Albert Museum to go and have a look at their miniature gallery, and there was a couple of examples, in certain cases I don't know who they are, it's just a gentleman from the 1700s. But also, it was transportable. You could pop it in your pocket, you could move it around, you could put it on your bedside table, you could hang it on your living room wall, or pop it on, your coffee table by the side of where you were sitting. And I think what it was also demonstrating is how exquisite you can paint something that small.
John Paul, this is, as I understand it, this is a belonging of yours, which is now in the exhibition. How did it come to you? Are you part of the Sparke family?
Not at all. What it comes back to is that whole aspect of when I was 11 years old, I was involved in that celebration of the 250th anniversary of the Great Fire, when there was various activities going on in the town. This portrait came up for sale in January 2023, sold at an auction house in Market Harborough, advertised in the local paper, and I paid for it that day and brought it home. But what's even nicer, not just have you got the portrait of the person on the front, on the back, in that old handwriting, is the details of who she was, when she was born, when she died, and just a little bit about the fire as well.
So this particular miniature isn't just a painting, it's a document in its own right.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other thing is, it's quite often in the past, history, as they say, is quite often written by men and features men. This is about a woman from Northamptonshire. She wasn't nobility. She didn't live in one of the big houses in the county. What interested me was her great age that she lived to, and the fact that before the First World War, there were still connections with her locally, with people who lived in the town.
You mentioned that she originated in Rothwell. Presumably the people of Wellingborough didn't know her family at all until she became a trader, and even then didn't take much notice of her until the Great Fire of Wellingborough, at which point suddenly her name was writ large through her actions.
Whenever you look at people in the past, particularly to do with Wellingborough history, it's always the men who are mentioned. Very few women are mentioned, and particularly of a person who helped do something to protect the town.
A dark day of history as far as Wellingborough is concerned, but Hannah Sparke saving, or at least contributing towards saving the roof of the church and thereby the church in its own right. You bought this miniature at auction. It is your personal belonging. What is your emotional reaction to the item itself?
I'm always amazed when people get to 100. They've lived a whole century. And you think what they've seen in that whole century as well. She lived to 107. What must have it have been like? In the picture, she looks like she's got a very sharp instinct for dealing with people and dealing with situations like the Great Fire of Wellingborough.
Well, her selflessness, her act of saving the church clearly was received in a certain way by the local community. She's been immortalised in this miniature, which you have. The irony is that a woman called Sparke saved a church from the flames of the Great Fire of Wellingborough, and here she is immortalised for the exhibition as one of the 100 items. John Paul, thank you for telling me the story.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you for listening to this Histories of Northamptonshire podcast. If you would like to find out more about the objects or listen to other episodes in the series, go to www.northamptonmuseums.com. Alternatively, you can visit the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery, where you can see the A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects exhibition for yourself. The Histories of Northamptonshire project is funded by Arts Council England as part of the National Portfolio Programme.